Good evening. We are the Fanaddicts of Film. I am Joe, and I'm here with my good friend and longtime friend, Ben. Say hi, Ben.
Hello.
Tonight we're going to be discussing A Quiet Place. The new dramatic sci-fi thriller from John Krasinski and his directorial debut, co-starring his wife, Emily Blunt. And what a good film this was.
Yeah, well, oh my gosh, yeah. It's pretty good. I've always been a huge fan of John Krasinski just because I loved him in The Office.
Yeah.
And I loved his just great presence, good all around dude. And that was that Leatherheads? What was that movie? Leatherheads that he did with
that George Clooney directed.
George Clooney, yeah. So he was in that like years ago, but we hadn't seen him come with, and so he probably got the funding from Michael Bay on this, but
Michael Bay is one of the producers.
Wonderful, rewarding experience to see that happen. To see him after The Office, it was great to see him surface up in such a capacity.
Yeah, I mean he's done quite a few films, but unfortunately they're just not films that I've seen. It seems like he's leaning more towards more dramatic work as opposed to comedic work. But this film, really impressive, tight little sci-fi thriller. In a certain way, it felt like it belongs in the same sort of vein as 10 Cloverfield Lane, Ex Machina, District 9, Midnight Special. It Comes at Night, some of like these really tight, sort of intense or dramatic sci-fi films from either independent studios or major studios, but they all kind of have this nicely dramatic feel to it. And I got to be honest, I wasn't expecting a whole lot. I mean, I thought this will be entertaining.
Yeah.
I really didn't see how much I would connect with this film and the world that they exist in. It's a post-apocalyptic thriller where spoilers, just warning you right now, if you haven't seen it, or the trailers, post-apocalyptic kind of future where nobody really explains it. You just sort of get it from headlines,
right? That
some kind of meteor crashed on the earth, and from it these creatures emerge that are blind, but they go by sound.
Were they completely blind? I felt like that they had some sight, but it was just slight. It wasn't a very.
Again, nothing's really finite explained,
but
with the headlinings and the writings on the board that John Krasinski's father character,
I didn't
Lee, had written in his little workshop, mentioned they were blind, and maybe it was from headlines too, but they hunt by sound. Really interesting looking aliens too, with weird physiology that was just surprising.
Their heads when they got upset would like kind of explode with several eyelid type of things that would, or not eyelids, but they would just windows would open up, fold back and
especially when they would get their super hearing going. So you're in this sort of post-apocalyptic world where it seems like I'm guessing most of the population has been destroyed or moved underground, because there was a headline, move underground, but and I'm thinking, that's going to be really difficult to convince me that you can live in a world, especially the location that they're in. It's like a rural farmland, like in the heartland country, the Midwest. How could they do that and keep quiet? And yet they created convincing and smart ways of doing it. But I do feel like this film was also an examination of kind of the futility of trying to exist quietly. I'm actually impressed because it's a family drama, it's a post-apocalyptic sci-fi thriller, and it also had that kind of level to it as well, like the sort of futility that no matter what you do, there's always going to be sound present. It's always going to be threatening.
And the situation that these people are all thrown into, it's like it's like, how are you going to contain this? Just it's like one thing after another, and particularly, I was floored by Emily Blunt's performance here. She was really, really amazing. Having to go through that, I mean, basically going into labor while she has to keep quiet. I was like, how the hell are they gonna, gonna have this baby? And
through all the events.
Yeah.
Also, I really enjoy the use of sign language. Obviously, that's a good way to communicate when you can't really talk. When just talking as loud as we are would probably get us killed by now. Apparently, there's been a little bit of a backlash. A friend of mine was telling me tonight when I told him which film. He's seen the trailer. He was aware of some of the aspects of the film. He hasn't seen it yet, but he was saying that apparently people weird things are seeing it as a pro-life movie and a pro-gun movie, which they're having a problem with. But it's neither of those things. It's a movie. Well, I mean, I admit, part of me thought, what would be the point of it would be dangerous to bring a baby into this world where you have to keep silent, because as we all know, the only way a baby can communicate is through screaming and crying. But at the same time, they're a family, so what are they gonna abort a child? And where would you do that in this kind of scenario? So I felt like their characters had no choice. It happened, and they had to kind of ride that out. And as far as the pro-gun thing, I mean, it doesn't have like a die-hard level of gun violence. It's not a John Woo, gun ballet. There's like 3 scenes with a gun, you know what I mean? But it's a very intense thriller, and at 95 minutes, man, it just packs it all in there. Yeah,
it was an extremely unique take on an apocalyptic experience. Well, I mean, and like you said, felt very much like it belonged in the 10 Cloverfield Lane, taking complete control of the audience. In the startle syndrome, being like several times I found myself like just literally holding my face and. And especially with what Emily Blunt's character had to go through, Evelyn. So what Evelyn had to go through, have a baby, in the tub or whatever while she's, hiding from these things. On top of that, having a flooded basement while they're running after, and so much of it made me, because for quite some time, I was questioning, because it's like, okay, so they must be blind because they're able to walk around and have these big light setups. They're using Christmas lights for communication. To say that the aliens are here and there, using the Christmas lights. That was actually a really cool aspect to it.
Yeah, using the lights, turning the lights red as a warning. I also have to point out that I love the way this film was shot by Charlotte Bruce Christensen, who is a Danish cinematographer. She did The Girl on the Train, which also had Emily Blunt. She shot Fences with Denzel Washington, and I like the fact that for the most part in this film, they used traditional camera techniques, which is it's weird to say this, but it's almost a breath of fresh air, because so many films these days, it's just handheld and shaky cam handheld, which is nice and it serves a dramatic purpose. But I'm kind of getting bored with that as a way of telling an entire film, because I think film is it's a visual language, and I think it's nice to have a cinematographer who knows how to use different angles and tracking shots and static shots. And even when they did use a little bit of the handheld in some of the more dramatic scenes, it was very subtle, and even then the camera still moved almost like a crane effect, going down with the light reflection from the sunlight right in a dramatic moment. And I thought it just really again brought it on to the same level as a film like Midnight Special or Moon or these other smaller science fiction films that have more drama to it, and it's really nice to look at. I'm gonna have to pick this movie up when it comes out. I'm gonna physically buy it.
Once again, the startle factor, the surprise factor is rampant here.
Yes,
and I tiny cast. That's another thing that's really interesting. There's like 7 or 8 people here in the entire film.
Really,
and
7 throughout the entire movie.
Yeah, that's it. And so you got, everybody's got their moment where they're doing this, literally telling someone else to be quiet. But yeah, I mean, right off from the very beginning, and I'm not sure if I'm going to actually give this up, but horrible stuff happens right away.
Yeah.
And so you're literally you are thrown into these people's experience, whether you like it or not. And Joe, you mentioned something that was really cool, especially you were saying how you liked being in this world, or kind of being put into this situation where you got to be quiet.
Yeah.
And I noticed the people that are eating popcorn next to us, because I gave them a look a couple times. It's just a funny thing, because I have friends
every crunch.
Well, because of friends at work were saying people gossip and talk about it. It's just like, yeah, whatever you do when you go see this movie, don't buy popcorn, don't get any food, don't bring anything in, because you don't want to be that person who is the guy who's in there doing that.
Quiet. It is really quiet. There are jarring moments, and there is music, and there is a bit of dialogue, but it is a very quiet film. And I felt bad too, because I bought a bag of nuts and raisins, and I'm trying, that's why I'm dumping. I don't know if you noticed, I would dump huge handfuls so I wouldn't have to keep going back to the bag, and I felt bad. But I'll tell you this much: once it was out and in my hand and it goes into my mouth, you don't hear it. Those people, they were like, you could hear them picking up the popcorn and crunching it, and I kept thinking, are they just chewing with their mouths open? How do you do that in a film like this where it really is quiet? And this isn't a knock, but if you were at a big effects action movie like a Marvel movie or Star Wars movie or something, you wouldn't even notice, because those films rarely have silence in them. But this film really, which I do think is kind of a missed opportunity. There is something to be used and gained in silence.
Yes.
And this film really utilized that, not just because it's called A Quiet Place, but it really builds tension, man. Mm-hmm. And this movie, there were a couple of scenes. I think you jumped a couple more times than I did. It got me the once, and then after that, I was like, okay, bring it. Now I know what's going to happen. I know you know, because I'm so used to these kind of movies. Once a movie kind of introduces that aspect, it's like, okay, now I'm prepared. It's going to happen again. But there were a few moments where I was literally kind of sinking into my seat.
Yeah.
Oh, what's going to happen?
Especially with the corn, when they fall into the corn.
Yeah,
that was a big part. There's
the giant corn silo. Yeah,
and then they're and then especially when Emily Blunt's dealing with her, trying to have the baby while trying to save these,
and also dealing with her accident at the same time. It's like she's going into labor, hurts herself and is being hunted by an alien creature all at the same time.
And I couldn't help but think, since you mentioned the score. Throughout this film, the score is actually really great stuff. There were moments where it reminded me of Terminator, just moments, of course, and then and then some other reminded me of Forgive Me, the guitarist for Radiohead. He did There Will Be Blood. There are moments of really dark string moments that reminded me of that. Very versatile, but I think the soundtrack was perfect. It was perfect, but I couldn't help but think, what if there was no soundtrack? Because that would, in some crazy ways, it would be powerful, but at the same time, it would probably, of course, it'd be an entirely different film.
It would have a different film.
But in the sense that they're trying to evoke this quietness in everything and everything, having no music at all. I don't know how it would be, but it would be extremely different. It would
definitely be different, and that's a good thing to think about. I gotta say though, Marco Beltrami did the score, and we were talking about that earlier, and I did.
What else has he done?
One of his films, but he's done he did Scream 2. He did Guillermo del Toro's Mimic, Resident Evil, Guillermo del Toro's Blade 2, Dracula 2000, Hellboy again for Guillermo del Toro. Flight of the Phoenix, let's see, 310, the remake of 310 to Yuma, Live Free or Die Hard, The Woman in Black with Daniel Radcliffe, the Hammer film, which was really good, based on the book. He did music for the TV show V, the remake of V, which
we've both talked about how we thoroughly actually enjoyed.
We may have to do a few episodes on original V and new V. He's done some Don't Be Afraid, the remake of Don't Be Afraid of the Dark, Jonah Hex, which I realized wasn't a very great DC movie.
I actually did like that. I mean, it wasn't as bad as people say. I actually enjoyed Jonah Hex.
I think at 85 minutes, I could tell that it had been chopped. The producer stepped in and said, "We're going to But Josh Brolin actually, as a fan of the Jonah Hex and Hex comics, the follow-up where Jonah Hex gets thrown into the future, into a Mad Max landscape, and I love that character, and I thought he did an admirable job. This guy also scored World War Z, The Wolverine, Logan, Snowpiercer. So he's done some really good scores. Television shows like.
Did you like the Snowpiercer? I love Snowpiercer.
Oh, I loved Snowpiercer.
That was great. It's
fantastic. Different than the comic book that it's based on, but being that the comic book it's based on is French, and I had never read it before the movie came out, it really didn't make any difference to me. But again, Marco Beltrami, he does music on Lucifer. So he's ran the gambit of films, and he's a pretty good as far as I'm concerned, a pretty good composer of film. And I that's the thing, is I'm trying to think of some of the, because there wasn't a lot of music in this film, but it was just right for those dramatic and intense moments, because and I actually have to say I might disagree with the silent aspect, because in retrospect, thinking about it, it would be quiet, and then when something would be jarring, that music would kick in right at that moment.
By no means did I say it would be better.
It would be different.
It would just be extremely different, and I think that it would. Without the music, this film definitely would not be as good as it was. It just made me think of, like, okay, how do you sink yourself deeper? How do you fall deeper into this world by making it more crazy realistic, by taking the music out, and then you're left with complete silence.
I mean, I'd also like to point out that the eldest daughter,
she was
Reagan,
really cool.
played by Millicent Simmons, was very good.
Yeah,
her character is deaf, and I'm not sure if the actress is or not, but I really liked how early in the film, throughout the film, they play with that aspect just in the sound design. For instance, there's a scene in the beginning where she's signing to her youngest brother, and when the camera's on the youngest brother, you can hear the ambient noise in the background. You can hear the microphone picking up, like if I was to be silent right now, you hear that ambient noise. But when it would cut to her, it was like completely silent, kind of putting you in her perspective, and that later on comes out to play, and what I think is one of the most intense moments of the film, where she's in the corn maze, creature comes from behind, and it just, in a lot of ways though, it did remind me a bit of It Comes at Night, which came out last year. I don't know if you saw, where instead of sort of an alien thing, it's more of a viral outbreak that's creating kind of zombified people. They're not zombies,
but they're just kind of mind control, or
kind of turning into like monsters.
Okay,
with the dead eyes, and the intent is to kill.
Can they still talk?
No.
Okay.
They become monsters. But that film was about one family trying to survive, and then another family that joins them, and that tension that builds between them. If you haven't seen It Comes at Night, it's a really good post-apocalyptic horror film with similarities. They're living in the woods and hidden, kind of like this. But I'm not saying this is a knockoff in any way, because this film, it's just simply this one family, and their dynamic alone is enough to really carry this entire story out. And I really liked the dynamic of this family, especially in the tragedy that they have to endure.
Speaking of family dynamic, one of my favorite scenes in this is when he takes his son to when John Krasinski's character, which is Lee Abbott, he takes his son to the waterfall.
Yes.
And he's like, the son is just like, they're gonna hear you, because this whole time they're, terrified of making any noise. And of course, Lee explains to his son, it's going to be okay, because we're, it's like white noise. You have a noisy river, a very loud river that's louder than you, so you can. And so they go up to this waterfall, and he's like, and then he screams, and you literally
terrifies the
and
son.
Because we've been so adjusted, it's our eyesight, it's been adjusted to the light or whatever. Your body is adjusted to the situation. I jumped when he screamed, but he's showing his son it's okay to scream because you're next to the waterfall and it's not allowed. And that scene of watching this cute kid just go, oh my gosh, I've never screamed in my life, and I get to scream.
Yeah.
It's just, and it was priceless.
And again, playing with sound, and I love the juxtaposition in sound in this film, because it really, really puts you in the mood and the feel of this film. In that scene, when Lee yells out, and he does kind of a thing, it is a bit jarring, because you hear it clear as day, even though there's this waterfall that's really loud, and you understand the son's intrepidation over this and fear. And when he explains to him, it's okay, we're safe, and then the son, Marcus, screams out. You get it from the other camera angle where the water's in front of him, so you can't really hear him. So they got it from two different points of view. So from where they were standing, of course the kid's going to be terrified, because you can hear it clear as day. But from outside of that area, the water is drowning it out, so they are safe. It's an area that they can go and they can talk and they can communicate again. And they almost seem to have soundproofed one of the rooms, because remember,
That's right. Yeah.
he does mention we're safe here, we can talk, and it's about the only time you really hear dialogue. There are moments when
When they're finally,
signing,
is it the basement? Okay.
there are moments when they're signing and they're kind of talking, under their breath, some of the words, but there is one moment where he's like, "We're safe, we can talk again," and you're like, "Wow, that must be a relief." Would have been kind of funny if she went, "Oh my God, I forgot what your voice sounded like. Don't talk." No, but it's not a comedy. Again, though, beautiful cinematography and good sound design and good music.
Yeah, and once again, the big standout here is Emily Blunt. This was a film. I mean, I'm not sure if this is true, but I heard rumors that it was like Emily was like, come on, John, make me a movie that I can kick butt in, that I can really do well in, and I guess this is what, and John's like, okay, and then so that, I mean, I heard that was kind of what it kind of materialized, or at least had been looking for someone, and then they fell on it. He decided to have his wife or whatever, but she is the huge standout here, and of course,
Millicent Simmons.
Millicent Simmons I thought she was great too. I loved them both, I think maybe the one flaw that you pointed out, that Lee's character, John Krasinski's character, kind of ended up having a heroic death for no reason at the end there.
Yeah. So again, spoilers. The daughter, who's deaf, her father, John Krasinski's character Lee, has been trying to boost her hearing aid so she can hear better, so she's safer. Do you know what I mean? And it hasn't been working. But anytime she gets close to one of these aliens,
which I thought was actually really great. That it's the one weapon that they have against them is her hearing aid.
They couldn't figure out the weapon. So it's like the hearing aid starts to buzz. It starts to send the monster into kind of a seizure. And it happens 3 times before she finally puts 2 and 2 together. And I just kind of thought, well, because I kept thinking in the silo that she's finally going to figure it out. And then she doesn't. Then they're in the truck. And I thought, now she's going to know. That's why she got in the truck. Next to my brother, this thing is bugging it. But she turns the damn thing off, and I thought, well, okay.
That was weird.
But, at the same time, I guess I got to cut her slack. She is a kid, and, and it works for dramatic purposes, because that final moment with John Krasinski really did hit me hard, because it's a father-daughter moment, and
that was great too, especially because she believed that he had blamed her because it was she had played in a part in something that had happened previous to his other son, to the youngest little kid, that poor little kid. And so it's like she was blaming herself this whole time and feeling awful about it, just feeling horrible about it, because it was like, she felt like, several times they were having a conversation, and she's like, yeah, right, he doesn't love me, he loves you, type of thing. And then for him to say, doing the signing, I love you, I teared up a little bit, because he's basically letting it know, you know what, it's going to be okay, I'm going to die right now, but I still love you. That was a wonderful moment.
I was kind of surprised, and I know it's for dramatic purposes, and I know it's just a film and a story, but I didn't want to, I kind of felt like it might have been interesting if it had been just a little bit longer, and instead of sort of sacrificing himself, just pick up a rock and throw it somewhere. You know what I mean? Create a noise over there and get it away from you and your kids. Just
there could have been.
But in the heat of the moment, you never know how you're going to react. It's kind of like Saving Private Ryan. People were upset with what's the actor's name? Jeremy Davis's character, how he freezes up on the steps and allows the Nazi to kill another member of his company. And people are, I wouldn't have done that. Well, you never know until you're there. In a situation like that, maybe the only thing that the father could think of was, I have to protect my children. That's my one thing in life, is to protect these kids. And so he just chose that. And either way, it doesn't take away from the dramatic effect of the film. And then from that point on, it even though that happens and you're thinking, well, maybe they could have done it this way or that way, it really carries the dramatic after effects of a situation like that. They played with that well. The characters were really affected by this. And then the ending, everyone in that audience at the end just wow.
Yeah.
Like, did you hear everybody?
Yeah. Yes.
Like, it was like,
yes,
wow.
Definitely. I really thoroughly enjoyed this film. It was definitely short and sweet in that regard. Once again, it's a situation film where you're literally you are put in the situation with them, and you are feeling their fear with them. The startle factor everywhere. So
even though the film itself only takes place over the course of 2 days, day 472 to day 473, after the events that caused it, you get a real sense of what their daily life is like, even though it doesn't go through the motions of showing you what they do day in and day out, just from what's established, from what you can see in their patterns of what they're doing every day. It really feels like, for me anyways, it's like again, that's why I said I liked getting into that world, is because I believed what they were doing to survive. And it was a day-to-day struggle, which, man, it really grabbed onto me. And in a lot of ways, I kind of feel like they could have even thrown this into to the Cloverfield anthology series, and it wouldn't have bothered me. The only reason why I say that is because it did feel kind of like it had the type of storytelling to be up there with 10 Cloverfield Lane, which I think is the best of the Cloverfield films.
Yeah, definitely.
And the reason why I say that too is because only the original Cloverfield was made to be Cloverfield. The other two films in the series thus far, 10 Cloverfield Lane and the Cloverfield Paradox, were not written as sequels to build a franchise. They were written as individual stories that J.J. Abrams had optioned to produce, and let's just throw the Cloverfield name on it instead of calling it the Cellar or the God Particle. And I feel like A Quiet Place could have been in that same anthology series. I say anthology because it doesn't really seem like they're all set in the same continuity, but it's fine that it stands on its own, because again, I would still put it in that same, if you like good dramatic thematic science fiction thrillers or dramas that are more thinking person as opposed to special effects, definitely give this a view. I'm sure if you've made it this far in our podcast, you've already seen it, because we have just spoiled this for you in a good way. But
and I think a lot of people have seen this too. One of the things that did stand out to me, in addition to all the characters and their motivations, was the design of the monsters and their giant outer/inner ear. It's like this giant ear that, or at least, like, I guess you would only see. It was difficult to kind of make the shape of where it was on their body and everything. It's just kind of like all of a sudden you're there and you're seeing this giant membrane that's an ear, and obviously. Being someone who studied audio frequencies and sound and music and all these things, it's really an interesting concept to see, and to see her hearing aid become this weapon against it somehow, because John Krasinski's character had boosted the frequencies, boosted the amplifier and all that stuff. So that was really, really fun and interesting. We appreciate you guys so much. Thanks so much for hanging out with us, and I hope that you enjoyed this film too, and I hope you enjoyed this review of the Fanaddicts of Film.
And I'm just going to quickly give it my rating. I usually do 4 stars is my highest. I'd give this 3. Upon reflection, maybe 3.5. It's definitely up there as one of my favorite films of the year so far.
Okay. So I give it 27 Carmichaels out of 100 shoes. Just kidding.
So in other words, you liked it.
Yeah, that's definitely a like, of course. No, I don't know. It's difficult to say, but if we're doing out of 4 stars, I'd say 3. I'd say 3 out of 4. Yeah. Let's keep it consistent so we know where we're basing things from. Yeah, I'll say 3 out of 4.
Okay. And just real quick too, before we end this, I'd just like to say that I do enjoy this trend of these type of science fiction films, because I love the spectacle event science fiction films. I love the Marvel and the Star Wars and the Star Trek and then the Aliens and all that. They're a lot of fun, but I love this trend, films like Arrival, and even when they veer into comedy like The Watch or Safety Not Guaranteed. I just like that science fiction is probably bigger now and more accepted now than it's ever been. Old-timey radio voice. And I want to see more of this trend continue. It's like it's all just the outer limits as as movies now.
Yes.
You know, like fantastic. So I urge you to go and see this. Thanks for joining us, and again, like and subscribe.
Yeah, please subscribe if you like this. We have a lot more where that came from. Check out some of our other episodes on the channel. We have some really cool stuff. Joe and I are going to be doing a lot of more science fiction and horror
movies.
stuff. A lot more movies this year. Our schedule's a little crazy, so we're just getting stuff together. But we appreciate you so much. We have been the Fanatics of Film, and have a wonderful, pleasant day.